Hello my dear students, in our new episode of biology program for the third secondary grade. Now we are going to explain the sexual reproduction in living organisms. Sexual reproduction means the production of new individuals by two parents, male and female, because of the presence of the gametes, male and female gametes. And we know that the gametes are produced as a result of meiotic division. The meiotic division is the kind of cell division can reduce the number of chromosomes from the diploid number or 2n into haploid number 1n. The two gametes or the two haploid reproductive cells, they fused together during the fertilization to form the zygote. Zygote can grow and divide by mitosis to produce the embryo. The embryo grow and the cells also divide by mitosis to produce the individual which will become or develop to be the adult. So the sexual reproduction as shown in this slide. Sexual reproduction need the presence of two individuals, male and female. Female to produce the sexual gametes. Gametes fused together, fertilization forms the zygote. The zygote then divide and grows to the embryo, then to young and adults. What about the properties of the sexual reproduction? Sexual reproduction need more time and energy because sexual reproduction occurs after the elapse of a certain age and need proper nest for mating. They may alternate the guarding of the eggs and the protection of the youngest. Also, the sexual reproduction act as a production of new individuals that takes place by half number of the individuals only, the females only. The number of males in any kind of species and the number of females ratio up 50%, 50%. So if the females only had the ability to produce, that means that need more amount of energy. Sexual reproduction provides genetic variation that act as the advantage of sexual reproduction that help the individual for facing the changes in the environmental conditions. So the sexual reproduction is a production due to the presence of or the formation of gametes. The gametes formed as a result of meiotic division. During the meiotic division, crossing over takes place to produce variation or genetic variations that produce different individuals that can facing the changes in the environmental conditions. So the living organisms which are produced as a result of the sexual reproduction can facing the change in the environmental condition due to the differentiation between the living organisms due to the genetic variation during the formation of gametes by meiosis division. So what about the difference between sexual and asexual reproduction? In the case of the sexual reproduction, it takes place by two parents. That because the two parents need the presence of the formation of gametes. Gametes is formed by meiosis division. Meiosis is a source of genetic variation. The variation need or produce different individuals. The differentiation of the individuals helps the species to adapt to the new conditions. That takes place in the higher organisms and that need long time and a high amount of energy for maturation and pregnancy. Also that need high biological cost because the females only can reproduce. So the comparison between sexual and asexual reproduction. In the case of the sexual reproduction that takes place by two parents, but single parent only in the asexual reproduction. The sexual need two parents to produce gametes, but no gametes are formed during the asexual reproduction. The gametes are formed by meiotic division, but all the kinds of asexual reproduction that takes place by mitosis division. The sexual reproduction is the source of genetic variation. But there is no genetic variation in the case of the asexual reproduction. The offspring which are produced as a result of sexual reproduction are different, but all the offspring that produced as a result of the asexual reproduction are similar because they are produced as a result of mitosis division, which form two cells similar to the mother cell or two individuals similar to the single parent. In the case of the sexual reproduction, the differentiation of the individuals lead to adapt with the new conditions, but there is no adaptation with the new conditions in the case of the asexual reproduction. The sexual reproduction takes place in living organisms which are differentiated into males and females. So it takes place in higher organisms. But in the case of the asexual reproduction, that takes place in the lower organisms. If the sexual reproduction need long time and high amount of energy for maturation, in the case of the asexual reproduction, it needs short time and little amount of energy. In the case of the sexual reproduction, it needs biological cost because the females only can reproduce, but in the case of the asexual reproduction, it doesn't need high biological cost because all individuals can reproduce. So this is the difference between the sexual and the asexual reproduction. But what about the types of sexual reproduction? Sexual reproduction takes place by two types. The first is the conjugation. The second is the sexual or bisexual gametes. In the case of the conjugation that takes place in the primitive algae, as the Spirogyra, some protozoa, and some fungi. But in the case of the sexual reproduction, that takes place in higher plants and higher animals, because the female produces gametes, also the male produces gametes as a result of meiosis, and due to the fusion between male and female gametes that forms a zygote which can develop to produce complete individual. So there are two kinds of sexual reproduction, sexual reproduction by gametes and sexual reproduction by conjugation. But in the case of the asexual reproduction, there are 6 types of asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction by binary fission, number 2 by budding, number 3 by regeneration, number 4 by sporogeny, number 5 act at the kind of the parthenogenesis, the last one is the tissue culture. But in the case of the sexual reproduction, 2 types of sexual reproduction only, by conjugation and by gametes. What about the sexual reproduction by conjugation? Conjugation takes place by 2 types. The first is the conjugation by the scalary form, which is called the scalar form conjugation. The second is the lateral conjugation. This slide explains that the Spirogyra act as a kind of green algae. It contains spiral chloroplast, can carry out photosynthesis to form the food. The Spirogyra supply the water where the Spirogyra live with the oxygen that released as a result of the photosynthesis process. In the case of the scalary form conjugation, 2 parallel ribbons of Spirogyra, they arranged parallel to each other, and the protrusion appear at the 2 sides of both of them. As the 2 sides, the protrusion increase to allow each of them to attach to each other, and the transverse wall disappear. Therefore, during the conjugation, the protoplasm of one of the 2 cells migrate to attach to the other one. So the fusion between the protoplasm of both of the 2 cells that form the zygote. The zygote surrounds itself with the thick coat to form the zygospore. Zygospore is a zygote surrounded with a thick coat to protect it against the unfavorable conditions. So the sexual reproduction by conjugation takes place in the unsuitable conditions, as a drought, as a change in the water temperature or purity. But in the suitable conditions, they reproduce by mitosis. That act as a kind of asexual reproduction during the favorable conditions by the binary fission. So Spirogyra can reproduce asexually by binary fission in the case of the suitable or the favorable condition. But at the unsuitable condition, it reproduces sexually by conjugation. But there is no alternation in the life cycle of the Spirogyra because each type of reproduction takes place in a certain conditions. During the favorable condition or the suitable condition, the Spirogyra reproduce asexually by binary fission. But during the unfavorable conditions, the Spirogyra can protect itself against the unsuitable condition. So that need to the presence of the zygote or zygospore. The zygospore act as a kind of diploid spore to protect the spirogyra against the unfavorable conditions. So what is the difference between scalariform and the lateral conjugation in spirogyra? The scalariform conjugation takes place when two filaments of the spirogyra arranged parallel to each other, and the protrusion grow in the wards between them. Then the walls in between the protrusion disappear, forming the conjugation tube. The protoplasm of one cell moves across the conjugation tube to the cell of the opposite filament to form zygote. Zygote is coated by thick wall forming the zygospore, that to protect it along the unsuitable conditions. But during the presence of the favorable condition, the spirogyra can germinate as any kind of spore. This image explains the presence of the scalariform conjugation. Scalariform means ladder. Ladder means two sides and the rungs between them. The two sides are the two filaments, but the rungs act as the conjugation tubes act as the rungs of the ladder. So this kind of the conjugation is called the scalariform conjugation. In the life cycle which appear on the slide, that explains that the presence of two filaments of spirogyra. The two filaments of spirogyra, each of them form the protrusion. The protrusion grows to form the conjugation tube. The protoplasm migrates through this conjugation tube to fuse with the other one to form zygote. The zygote, 2N or diploid, that surrounds itself with the thick coat. During the presence of the favorable condition, germination of the zygote takes place, but the zygote 2N need to divide by meiosis to reduce the number of chromosomes from the 2N into an N, or from diploid to haploid. So this stage explains the meiosis 1, which allows the cell or the nucleus of the spirogyra divided into two nuclei, each of them on N. After that, the meiosis 2, where the formation of 4 haploid cells. The germination of the zygospore produce one ribbon of spirogyra which containing one N or haploid cell that can divide by binary fission as a kind of asexual reproduction during the favorable conditions. But if the spirogyra exposed to dryness, increase or decrease the temperature or the impurities in water or unfavorable conditions, that leads to the conjugation. But the second kind of the conjugation is called lateral conjugation. Lateral conjugation occurs between two adjacent cells of the same filament or the same ribbon. The protoplasm of one cell moves to the adjacent cell through an opening in the wall between them. So the steps of lateral conjugation, which appear in this slide, that the protrusion or the part of the cell wall between the two adjacent cells disappear, so the protoplasm of one of them migrate to the other one. That form the zygote. The zygote surrounds itself with a thick coat to protect it against the unfavorable conditions. So there are two kinds of conjugation, scalariform conjugation and the lateral conjugation. What about the difference between them? Scalariform conjugation takes place between two cells in two parallel ribbons, but the lateral conjugation takes place in two adjacent cells in the same ribbon. In the case of the scalariform conjugation, after the conjugation, cells of one filament become empty and the other filaments have zygospore. But in the case of the lateral conjugation, after conjugation, one cell is empty while the adjacent one containing the zygospore, because the lateral conjugation takes place in one ribbon or two cells in the same ribbon, but the scalariform in two cells of two different ribbons. So what about the reproduction by sexual gametes? We understand that the kinds of sexual reproduction, two kinds, by conjugation, that in the case of spirogyra, and the conjugation in spirogyra divided into conjugation by the scalariform conjugation and also lateral conjugation. But the sexual reproduction by gametes, there are two kinds of gametes, male and female gametes. What about the difference between them? If fertilization takes place between gametes, that leads to the formation of the zygote. But the fertilization may take place takes place in the terrestrial living organisms inside the female body. That's called the internal fertilization. But if the fertilization takes place in water, that's called the external fertilization. What about the difference between the external fertilization and the internal fertilization? In the case of the external fertilization, both male and the female put their gametes in water. But in the case of the internal fertilization, male introduced the sperms to the ova inside the female body. The external fertilization, the fertilization occurs outside the body or in water, but the internal fertilization inside the female body. The embryonic development stages in the case of the external fertilization are completed in water, but in the case of the internal fertilization, as that in mammals, the embryonic stages are completed inside the female body. The external fertilization show at the aquatic animals like bony fish, but the internal fertilization, as reptiles, birds, most of insects and worms, that takes place inside the female body. So that's the difference between the fertilization or the internal and the external fertilization according to the site of fertilization. In the case of the water, that's called the external fertilization, but in the female body is the internal fertilization. What about the third kind of reproduction? We know that the reproduction are divided into three types or three kinds. The first is the asexual reproduction and divided into 6 types. The second is the sexual reproduction and divided into 2 types. The third is the alternation of generation. Alternation of generation means the life cycle of the living organism include 2 generations. One of them is produced as a result of sexual reproduction, but the other is produced as a result of asexual reproduction. So what about the examples of alternation of generation? 3 examples of alternation of generations. The first, that in the life cycle of the plasmodium, which act as a parasite that causing the malaria disease. The second is the life cycle of bilharzia worms. The third is the life cycle of furnace as a polypodium and the adiantum. So what about the stages or the steps of the life cycle in the case of the plasmodium, which causes malaria disease? The plasmodium is a protozoan parasite, infect both human and female Anopheles mosquito. Its life cycle starts when the infected female mosquito bites the human skin. It pours the sporozoites, which act as the infective stage, in the form of spindle shape in the blood. The sporozoites move toward the liver, where they spend an incubation period during which nuclei divide by schizogony, giving the several merozoites by 2 cycles of asexual reproduction. So in the case of the reproduction of the plasmodium, which causing malaria disease in the human liver, that act as a kind of asexual reproduction, because the sporozoite which migrate through the blood to get inside the hepatic cells divided by mitosis division to form many merozoites inside the liver. So due to the rupture of the hepatic cells, the great number of merozoites spread in blood and infect the RBCs. Inside the RBCs, the merozoites divided also by schizogony, which act as a kind of asexual reproduction, which is called the fragmentation, which act as a kind of mitosis division of the merozoites. Inside the RBCs, the merozoites are divided many times to form huge number of merozoites. Some of them repeat the infection of RBCs, but the others can change into gametocytes. So the 2 kinds of reproduction inside the hepatic cells and also inside the RBCs inside the human beings, that takes place asexually by fragmentation or schizogony. But in the case of the reproduction inside the female Anopheles mosquito, that start with the sexual reproduction, after that that's followed by the asexual reproduction. So what about the cycle of the plasmodium, which causes malaria disease inside the human body? Merozoites migrates to blood, infect the RBCs, where they divide many times, producing a huge number of merozoites. That takes place every 2 days. Therefore, the symptoms of malaria disease will appear in the malaria patient after or each 2 days. These symptoms appear due to or during the destroying of the RBCs or the infected RBCs, causing the symptoms of malaria fever that appear on the patient at the heat or fever, chill, shivering, sweating. So that act as the symptoms of malaria disease that produce as a result of the rupture of RBCs and the presence or the production of toxic substances that produced by the parasite, which is called the hemosine, that act as a toxic substance that causing the malaria symptoms that appear on the patient. But inside the patient blood, the presence of great number of merozoites, some of them change into gametocytes. Gametocytes act as inactive gametes inside the human blood. Inside the human blood, they can't fuse together to form a zygote. Therefore, they are called the gametocytes or inactive gametocytes. The inactive gametocytes can transfer to the female Anopheles mosquito. When another female Anopheles mosquito infects the patient, it can carry the gametocytes with the blood during its feeding by the human blood, and the gametocyte become active only inside the mosquito or inside the stomach cavity of the female Anopheles mosquito. We explain that the female Anopheles mosquito feed on blood. Therefore, the female Anopheles mosquito act as a transmitter of the malaria disease. But the males live in the gardens, feed on the nectar of the flower. The male mosquitoes can't feed on blood. So there is no malaria disease can transmit by the males, but the infected female Anopheles mosquito only can infect the human being because it can carry the sporozoite or the parasite. What about the division or the stages that takes place inside the female Anopheles mosquito? Inside the female Anopheles mosquito, some merozoites or some gametocytes inside the cavity can become active gamete and fuse together to form the zygote. The zygote can divide or develop into movable stage, which is called the ookinete. The ookinete can penetrate the wall of the stomach mosquito and change into oocyst. The oocyst inside the female Anopheles mosquito containing cells with the 2N or diploid cells. The diploid cells of the female Anopheles mosquito that can divide by meiosis division, that to reduce the number of chromosomes from the haploid, from the diploid number to P haploid. All the life cycle of the stages of the Plasmodium which causes malaria disease that takes place by the mitosis division, except in the case of the gametocyte. In the case of the oocyst, the cells or the diploid cells divided by meiosis to form haploid cells that divided to change into the sporozoite. The sporozoites act as the infective stage of the human beings, but the gametocytes act as the infective stage of the female Anopheles mosquito. So the malaria disease that caused by the parasitic protozoa, the parasitic protozoa in the female that takes place by the infection of the human being by the sporozoite which act as the infective stage, but the gametocytes inside the patient which transfer to the female Anopheles mosquito that act as the infective stage of the female Anopheles mosquito. What about the complete cycle or life cycle of the Plasmodium which causes malaria disease? We can ask you about drawing of the life cycle of the Plasmodium which causes malaria disease. The life cycle of the Plasmodium which causes malaria disease that start when the female Anopheles or the infected female Anopheles mosquito bites the patient, and the sporozoites get inside the blood and migrate to the blood of the human beings and migrate to the liver and inside the liver it divided by the kind of asexual reproduction, which is called the schizogony or fragmentation. Therefore, that produced number of individuals are similar to each other due to the division which takes place by mitosis. In this image, that produce the or act as a life cycle of the plasmodium, which causes malaria disease. That's act at the sporozoite, which act as an infective stage, which you get inside the hepatic cells, causing the infection and divided by the schizogony to produce number of merozoites. The merozoites get out during the rupture of the hepatic cells and infect new RBCs. Inside the RBCs also mitosis division takes place by the fragmentation to produce a great number of merozoites. Some of them repeat the infection of another RBCs, but the others change into gametocytes. The gametocytes are inactive inside the human blood, but become active inside the cavity of the stomach mosquito. They fuse together to form zygote. Zygote change into movable stage, which is called the ookinete. The ookinete start to penetrate the wall of the stomach mosquito and get inside the wall change into oocyst. The oocyst cells divide by meiosis to change the number of chromosomes from 2n into 1n or haploid cells, and also divided by sporogony to produce a huge number of sporozoites that can migrate from the stomach mosquito or the wall from the stomach to get in the salivary glands of the mosquito, so the mosquito become ready to infect another person. That's the life cycle of the plasmodium, which causes malaria disease. But the second is the life cycle of fern plant. We know that the number of ferns are great number of plants as the fern plants, but the most famous one or the most common one, the adiantum, which grow in the well edge and shaded streams or mud soil, and also the polypodium plant that act as the ornamental plant. There are two types of plants which are called ferns. So the life cycle of the ferns includes the sexual and asexual reproduction, but start with the asexual reproduction in the stage which is called the sporophyte. The cells of the sporophytes containing or the stem of the sporophyte carry the leaves. The leaves carry a great number of sori. The singular is the sorus. The sori or each sorus containing a number of sporangia. The cells of the sporangia divided by meiosis division to reduce the number of chromosomes into haploid number 1n. That's called the spore. The spore, which produced as a result of meiotic division, act as a haploid cell containing a little amount of cytoplasm and the nucleus, and also surrounded by thick coat to protect it against the unfavorable conditions. The mature spore can release by wind for a very far distance until reaches the wet soil. The spore germinate, forming several cells that developed to green, flat, heart-shaped structure called the gametophyte. The gametophyte grow over the soil. The gametophyte is haploid, so it act as a shape which act as a green heart-shaped structure containing rhizoids for the absorption of water and salts from the soil, containing the male organs which called the antheridium, and the female organs that called the archegonia. The antheridia produce the sperms or the ciliated sperms that can migrate in water to reach the egg cell inside the archegonia, and the fertilization takes place to form zygote. Therefore, this kind of reproduction is called the sexual reproduction. The sporophyte, which produced as a result of the development or the growth of the zygote, that depends on the gametophyte during its feeding until form the roots. When the sporophyte form roots, the roots can absorb water and salts, and also the plant containing the stem and the leaves, and they can carry out photosynthesis. But the stem still in the soil and produce, or the sporophyte still in the soil as a dominant stage and produce huge number of spores. Therefore, the life cycle of the furnace includes the alternation of generation because it reproduces asexually during or inside the sporophyte to produce spores. It's act as a kind of asexual reproduction by sporogony, but also it can reproduce sexual reproduction in the case of the gametophyte. Therefore, there are two kinds of stages inside the furnace. The first is the sporophyte where sexual reproduction takes place. The second is the haploid gametophyte where sexual reproduction by gametes takes place. Therefore, the life cycle includes two generations. One of them is produced as a result of asexual reproduction in the sporophyte and sexual reproduction inside the gametophyte. Therefore, the life cycle of the plasmodium, of the polypodium, that's act at the kind of the reproduction. The first is the sexual in gametophyte, the second is the asexual in the sporophyte. The polypodium represents a typical example for alternation of generation in the living organisms on the plant or in the plant kingdom. That's the cycle of the reproduction in furnace that act as a sporophyte. The mature sporophyte containing cells, the lower cells containing the sorus containing sporangia. The sporangia, each sporangium can divide by meiosis to produce great number of spores, which haploid act as haploid cells. The spores get in mud soil to develop or germinate to produce the green heart-shaped structure, which is called the gametophyte, containing the rhizoids for the absorption of water and salts, the antheridia that act as a male organ, archegonia which act as a female organ containing the egg cell. The ciliated sperms get out from the antheridium and migrate or swim in water to reach the egg cell for fertilization to form zygote. The zygote develop to produce the sporophyte, which containing leaf, stem, and root, and it depends on the gametophyte. So the sporophyte act as the dominant stage in the life cycle of the plasmodium, which causes the polypodium, which act as a very typical example for the life cycle of alternation of generation, which act as a kind of reproduction. That's spores that released from the sporangia. The spore get in the mud soil and germinate to produce green heart-shaped structure that containing the rhizoids, gametophyte, and the sporophyte. That's the ciliated sperms which swim in water to reach the egg cell inside the archegonia. So fertilization takes place to form a zygote. The zygote form the roots and form the stem and the leaves that to form the sporophyte, so that act as a very small cycle to explain the life cycle of the furnace, which include alternation of generation due to the presence of sexual and asexual reproduction in the same cycle. But the formation of gametes in the gametophyte that takes place by mitosis division, not by meiosis, because the gametophyte is haploid or 1N. So the reproduction or the division in the cells can't takes place by meiosis, but takes place by mitosis. So the formation of gametes in the gametophyte takes place by the mitotic division because the mother cell is haploid. So what's the difference between gametocyte and the sporophyte in adiantum or polypodium? The gametophyte in adiantum produced from the germination of the spore, but the sporophyte produced from the growth of zygote. In the case of gametophyte, it's act as a flat green heart-shaped structure, but the sporophyte is green plants, has root, stem, and leaves. The chromosomal set in the case of gametophyte is haploid 1N, but diploid in the case of the sporophyte. In the gametophyte, it has antheridia and archegonia as the reproductive organs, but in the case of the sporophyte, it containing spore mother cells to produce spores. In gametophyte, it reproduces sexually by gametes, but in sporophyte, it reproduces asexually by sporogony. In the gametophyte, divide mitotically to produce gametes or by mitosis, but in the case of the sporophyte, it divides by meiosis to produce spores. So in this point, the formation of gametes takes place by mitosis, but the formation of spores takes place by meiosis that act as an exception because that act as a lower organism. In the case of gametophyte, it absorbs the water and salts by rhizoids, but in the case of the sporophyte, absorb water and salts by roots. The last point in the gametophyte, it degenerates after the formation of the sporophyte, but the sporophyte is not degenerated, act as a dominant stage. So the life cycle includes the two kinds of reproduction, sexual and asexual reproduction. What about the male gonads and the female gonads of adiantum? The male gonads of adiantum is called the antheridia, but the female is the archegonia. The antheridia at the lower part of the gametophyte, but the antheridia at the upper part of the gametophyte. The archegonia act as the upper part of the gametophyte. What about the third example of the alternation of generation? It's the life cycle of schistosoma or bilharzia. The life cycle of the schistosoma is an example of alternation of generation in animals. The worms reproduce sexually in man and asexually in snails, which act as an intermediate host. The two methods of reproduction enable the parasite to face the life of the parasitism, because in the case of the living organisms that can reproduce asexually can get the advantage of asexual reproduction, and the sexually can get the advantage of the sexual reproduction. But in the case of the alternation of generations, the living organism can get both the advantage of sexual and asexual reproduction. What about the questions that get or ask about the points of the kind of asexual reproduction and also the alternation of generation? The first question, choose the correct answer. Some algae can be produced by conjugation, sporogony, binary fission, all the above. We remember that the Spirogyra algae can be produced by conjugation as a scalariform and lateral conjugation. But also some algae can reproduce by sporogony, because in the life cycle of the Spirogyra that forms zygospore. And also binary fission takes place in the Spirogyra during the favorable condition. So the answer is all the above are right answers. The second question. The cells of Spirogyra containing triple the number of chromosomes of the zygote, number 2, double number of chromosomes in the zygote, number C, the same number of chromosomes of the zygote. The last one is the half number of chromosomes in the zygote. We know that the zygote is diploid to N, but the cells of Spirogyra or the body cells of the Spirogyra is haploid. Therefore, the answer that's the cells of Spirogyra containing half the number of chromosomes of the zygote. The next question. Sporogony takes place in all of the following organisms except adiantum, plasmodium, hydra, mushroom. Of course, the reproduction by sporogony takes place in adiantum and in plasmodium and the mushroom, but not takes place in the case of the hydra. So we know that the hydra can reproduce sexually and also can reproduce asexually by budding and by regeneration. The next question. The following diagram shows the reproduction in the living organisms, which depends on alternation of generations of different chromosomal sets, one with the 2N or diploid and the other is 1N or haploid. Which of the following organisms show this phenomena? The phenomena which containing the life cycle has the chromosomal sets 2N, after that 1N. In this diagram, the 2N divided by meiosis to produce haploid cells or haploid gametes. They fuse to form zygote and the life cycle is repeated. So the answer is the adiantum, where the presence of alternation of generation or two stages, the sporophyte and the gametophyte. Sporophyte reproduce by the formation of spores as a result of meiosis 1N, and also that can form the gametophyte. The gametophyte form male and female gametes, fused to form zygotes. The zygote form the sporophyte and repeat the cycle. The next question. In the life cycle of ferns, the sporophyte reproduce asexually by. This act as a very simple question because it reproduces asexually by spores. The spores are formed as a result of meiotic division of the sporangium inside the sorus at the lower surface of the leaf. The next question. Which of the following is diploid number of chromosomes? Spirogyra cells. That's not right answer because the cells of Spirogyra are haploid. The antheridia. The antheridia is the male organ of the furnace and it located in the gametophyte which act as a haploid. The merozoites of Plasmodium. The merozoites of Plasmodium malaria, which causes malaria disease, is haploid, but the last answer is the sporophyte of Polypodium that act as a diploid stage. So all the following is haploid except the sporophyte. The next question. The reproduction of Plasmodium malaria to produce merozoites occurs by binary fission, fragmentation, sporogeny, regeneration. The right answer is the fragmentation, which act as a kind of mitotic division which is called the schizogony.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت سيدنا محمدا الوسيلة والفضيلة والدرجة الرفيعة وابعثه اللهم المقام المحمود الذي وعدته. أحمدك ربي على نعمة الإيمان بك وشرف الإسلام لك وأصلي وأسلم على خاتم رسلك وخاتم أنبيائك سيدنا محمد، أذن الخير التي استقبلت آخر إرسال السماء لهدي الأرض، ولسان الصدق الذي بلغ عن الحق مراده من الخلق. سبحانك تفضلت بالتكليف وتفضلت بالمعونة، فأنت المتفضل أولا وأنت المتفضل آخرا. وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
Where the nucleus divided many times by mitosis to produce great number of nuclei, each surround itself with the little amount of cytoplasm and the membrane that leads to the formation of the merozoite. The merozoite can migrate to infect the RBCs or repeat the cycle, and some of them can change into gametophyte. The next question. The formation of gametes takes place by mitosis division in man, queen honeybee, adiantum, workers of honeybee. We understand that in the higher living organisms, the formation of gametes takes place by meiosis. But the formation takes place by meiosis in the furnace or the adiantum, because we know that the mother cell, which acts as a diploid cell, divided by meiosis to produce haploid cells or gametes. So the gametes normally formed as a result of meiotic division, which is a division that reduces the number of chromosomes from diploid to haploid. But in the case of the furnace, the gametophyte, which containing the male and the female organs, can produce gametes only by mitosis division because the mother cell is haploid. So the haploid cells can't reproduce by meiosis but by mitosis only. Therefore, the gametes that formed in the life cycle of the furnace, that takes place by mitosis, not by meiosis. The next question. The following living organism form zygote except Spirogyra, that forms zygospore, the Plasmodium, which causes malaria, that forms zygote and change into ookinete, if you remember. The Adiantum also forms zygote due to the fusion of the ciliated sperms and the egg cell inside the archegonia. But in the case of the amoeba, no zygote is formed. The next question. Match question. Choose from the column B what's suitable for column A. In the case of column B, column A, Spirogyra algae reproduce, aphid insect reproduce, starfish or sea star reproduce, mushroom fungus reproduce. In the case of the column B, the Spirogyra reproduce by conjugation. The aphid insect reproduce by parthenogenesis, that according a certain season. Starfish reproduce by regeneration. The last one, which is the mushroom, reproduce by the formation of spores, therefore that's called the sporogny. Therefore, the right answer is the Spirogyra algae reproduced by conjugation, the aphid insect reproduced by parthenogenesis, starfish reproduced by regeneration, the mushroom fungus reproduced by sporogny. The next question. Give scientific term for each of the following. The ability of unfertilized egg to develop into new individual, that act as a kind of asexual reproduction, which is called the parthenogenesis. So the parthenogenesis is the ability of the ovum to produce complete individual without the fertilization by male gamete, or the ability of unfertilized egg or ovum to develop into new individual without fertilization. The next question. The transmitters of Plasmodium among the human beings, that ask about the transmitter of the Plasmodium among the human being, or the living organism that can carry the infective stage to the human being. The answer is the infected female Anopheles mosquito. So the female Anopheles mosquito only is not act as the right answer, because it doesn't carry the sporozoites. And also the Anopheles mosquito is not right answer, but the right answer is the infected female Anopheles mosquito. The next question. The female organ of fairness. The female organs of fairness is the archegonia. The archegonia form the egg cell by mitotic division or by mitosis. So the egg cell act as a gamete which haploid similar to the mother cell which is formed in the gametophyte. The next question. The life cycle of the living organism includes two generations. One reproduces sexually while the other reproduces asexually. That's the definition of the third kind of reproduction, which is called the alternation of generation. The alternation, or in the case of alternation of generation, the living organism can get the advantage of both sexual and asexual reproduction because it reproduces sexually to get the variation of the living organisms and the advantage of the living organisms and can tolerate the changes in the environmental conditions. But in the case of the asexual reproduction, can propagate to great distance, can produce huge number of individual, can doesn't need amount of or more amount of energy, and all the individual can reproduce, so that decrease the biological cost in the case of the asexual reproduction. So the alternation of generation can get both of the advantages of sexual and asexual reproduction. The next question. The human organ where sporozoites spends the incubation period. The human organ where the sporozoites spend the incubation period. It is the liver as the right answer. Incubation period, it is the period or the time from the infection by the parasite and the appearance of the symptoms. The infection takes place in a certain time. After that, the symptoms appear that takes place, or this time act as the incubation period. So the infection takes place by the pores of the sporozoites inside the human blood. No symptoms appear, but the symptoms appear during the rupture of the RBCs after the division of the parasite inside the hepatic cells. So this stage, which is called the incubation period, that takes place inside the liver of the human beings. The next question. Correct the underlined words. Malaria fever results from the infection with the bilharzia in men. Bilharzia fever results from the infection with the bilharzia in men. Bilharzia is wrong word, but the right is the plasmodium. So the plasmodium that causing the malaria fever or malaria disease, but the bilharzia causing the bilharziasis disease. The next question. Sporozoites are the infective stage of the female Anopheles mosquito. The sporozoites, it's not act as the infective stage of the female Anopheles mosquito, but the infective stage of the human beings with the malaria disease. But the infective stage of the female Anopheles mosquito is the gametocytes, which can transfer from the human blood to the cavity of the female Anopheles mosquito when the female bites the patient and absorb amount of blood with the number of gametocytes. The next question. Correct the underlined words. The formation of gametes takes place by meiosis division in drones. The formation of gametes takes place by meiosis division in drone. We understand that the drone act as a haploid somatic cells. The haploid cells can't produce by meiotic division. The haploid cells is divided by mitosis only, because we remember that the drone or the male honeybee is produced as a result of parthenogenesis. Parthenogenesis means the ability of the ovum to develop to produce complete individual without fertilization. The ovum of the honeybee haploid or 1N. It divided by mitosis to develop to produce complete individual, which is a drone of honeybee. So the somatic cells of the honeybee is haploid, 1N. So it can't reproduce by meiosis to form the gametes, but the gametes formed as a result of mitotic division in the case of the male of honeybee. But in the case of the female honeybee, the formation of gametes takes place by meiotic division. So in the same species of the living organism as the honeybee, the female produce gametes as a result of the meiotic division, but the male form gametes as a result of mitotic division, because the female or the queen is diploid, but the male is haploid. The next question. In multicellular, as sponges and the hydra, the bud grow from the primary germ cells. That's not right. Primary germ cell is not right, but the answer is the interstitial cells. The interstitial cells is the meso layer between two outer and inner layer, so it can develop to produce the buds in the case of hydra, sponges, and the other multicellular which reproduce asexually by budding. The next question. In unsuitable condition, amoeba secretes a chitinous coat around itself to form zygospore. That's not right, but the zygospore is formed after the reproduction by the conjugation in the case of Spirogyra. But in the case of the amoeba during the unfavorable condition, that surround itself with the thick coat to form cyst. The cyst act as a mechanism to protect the amoeba against the unfavorable conditions. So it can surround itself with the coat. The coat protects it against the unsuitable condition, so it acts as a dormant stage still in the soil until the presence of the favorable condition or the suitable condition, and they can germinate to produce great number of individuals. My dear students, that's the end of this episode. Thank you very much. Goodbye and good luck.